communications with the technical difficulties and with the rescheduling. This was originally meant to be in January. It's already connected.
Okay. Okay, so,
But so this is John Seabrook talking about his most recent book, The Spinach King. Thank you again, everybody, for coming out, for making the time to come down, for the rescheduling, and all of the patience. And we will have books also at the end.
okay, thank you, Tia. Thank you for coming. And, this is, we'll let that go right, where's that going? Just like that? Yeah, do that. That's a little easy. What should I do?
Microphone.
Okay. Okay. Should I put it on my belly, you think? Yes. Good thing I have one. How's that? Is that good? That's good. Okay, that's a lot easier than holding it. All right, well, thank you, everybody. This is a special occasion for me because I feel like the book project actually started at the Cumberland County Historical Society about 10 years ago. I came down, met Warren and Jean and the rest of the staff, and it was in the Cumberland County Historical Society that I actually found the first evidence of this guy, my great-great-grandfather, who was the one who brought the Seabrooks from England to America, but mysteriously had pretty much disappeared. So there was no gravestone, there was no recording of his death. My Uncle Courtney had once told me that he had been buried in strangers' graves at the Deerfield Presbyterian Church. But when I actually looked into that, there was no strangers' graves at the Deerfield Presbyterian Church. And so his very existence was a mystery to me. And it was at the Cumberland County Historical Society that Warren looked up in the 1870 census and found him on Stratham's Neck Road, which is only a few miles from here. And that was where he died. Who was he? He was born in England and one of 12 children of a clergyman who was a Church of England priest. My great-great-grandfather, Thomas, who had been a poor farm boy who had managed to get a scholarship to Cambridge University. So he was probably the first of the Seabrooks who knew how to read and write, and the first really to be educated, but died young and poor, and his children kind of were scattered. And this guy, Samuel, who was, I think, his sixth child, ended up emigrating to America. He came in 1859, and he first went to Rhinebeck and herded cows up there. But when Charles Landis started offering his land in Vineland, he saw an ad in a local newspaper, and he came down with his wife and his two children, one of whom was Arthur, my great-grandfather, who started the farm. As many of you probably know, Charles Landis did give land almost for nothing to people, but asked you to meet certain requirements of improvement over, a certain period of time. And Samuel, for whatever reason, was unable to meet those requirements. And so he wrote this letter, and this letter, I mean, this is not the actual letter. The letter's handwritten. It's in the Vineland Historical Society, and I was in there and nosing around, and at that point it was Patricia Martinelli, And I said, well, is there anything in the back room? I mean, what else have you got? And she had this box of just sort of assorted letters and things, not sorted in any way. And I just started looking through them, and I found this letter, which is really the only actual sort of physical existence that this man really lived. And what he's doing here is this is a letter to Charles Landis saying that he can't carry on the improvements that he was supposed to do and asking for more time. And he didn't get it. And so he was basically dismissed from Vineland and ended up here. I think maybe he was a hired hand on the farm on Stratham's Neck Road. But, when he died, no one bothered to mark his grave. And even though his wife lived for another 50 years, so I don't know what he actually did, but I think one of the reasons that he kind of disappeared from history was because his grandson, C.F. Seabrook, didn't think that he was the right kind of ancestor for a great man like him. And so he actually made up a whole new genealogy for us. And he said we came from these wealthy landowning lords, and we were in South Carolina, and then we came up here because there were these rich Seabrooks in South Carolina who had plantations and lots of slaves. Anyway, that was all false. And so that gravestone you saw there, I commissioned this. And it's in the Deerfield Presbyterian Church. And I just felt that it was important to recognize this man, because the reason the Seabrooks are here is this guy. And even though he didn't amount to much, he got the process started. And without him, a lot of us wouldn't have been here, or none of this would have happened, really. So I appreciate him. And one of the pleasures of this book was being able to sort of set that right and recognize him. So this was his son, Arthur. And Arthur came over with him as a child. And then when Samuel died, Arthur was apprenticed to a local farmer, and he learned truck farming, which, as you know, was what vegetable and produce farming was called back then, not because they used trucks, because trucks didn't exist yet, but because the word truck was a synonymous for the word exchange or barter. And truck farmers often bartered their produce for other goods. And so that's why they were called truck farmers. And they were also sometimes called market gardeners. And that's the reason why New Jersey is called the Garden State, is because there were so many of these folks. And South Jersey was in a particular sweet spot because, well, the land is, first of all, so great, so rich. And then the markets in Philadelphia and New York were within a day's train ride. And the southernmost growing region to reach New York in a day. So you could get produce into the markets in Washington Market and Lower Manhattan before people a little bit further north could get it there, and you could charge a premium for that. So he became a very good truck farmer. He was a tenant farmer for a number of years over in BB Run. And then he bought a 58-acre farm called the Minch Farm in the 1890s. And that was the very beginning of Seabrook Farms. And, that land was there at what later was called Farm Central. And so, he was a very successful farmer, and he had several children, 3, and one of them was the man we all no, C.F. Seabrook, his son, Charlie. And Charlie was born in 1881, and Charlie hated farming. Charlie never wanted to be a farmer. Charlie, his hero was Henry Ford, and he wanted to be an industrialist. Ford had opened his car factory and his first one in 1904 in Detroit. And Charlie read all about it, and he was determined to leave the farm and go to the city and make his fortune in a similar way. But by the early 20th century, farms were mechanizing. We were getting motors, both electricity and internal combustion engines were coming to the farm. And so Charlie made the decision early on that instead of leaving the farm for industry, he would bring industry to the farm. He would create a vegetable factory, basically. And that was always the vision that he stuck to throughout his life. And what he created there in Upper Deerfield was essentially a Fordist factory, but instead of cars, originally fresh and canned vegetables, and then eventually frozen vegetables. The thing that really got him and Arthur started was irrigation. There was incredibly, this is something I learned, I didn't know this, at the turn of the century, 1900, turn of the last century, there was no irrigation in South Jersey. There was no means of irrigating the crops because everything was too flat. And you couldn't move water from one place to another because there were no pumps and engines to do it. And there was no slopes to let gravity do it. So if there was a drought, you were carrying buckets of water, to your crops and trying to keep them from dying. But in the early 20th century, motors, electric motors and engines began to appear. And he and his father, and they argued about who. And I have a feeling it was his father, but one of them found this inventor in Ohio who had created an overhead irrigation system, perforated pipes, but using an electric motor to drive water up into a water tower. And that was the first irrigation in this area. And they made a lot of money. They made, I think they made something like $20,000 in those dollars, which is a lot more than 20,000 today. On that first year, just by planting celery and lettuce under the irrigation and getting it to the markets in Philly and New York before anyone else could. His father Arthur wanted to take that money and put it in a bank, and basically wanted to retire. But Charlie was much more ambitious than that, and he wanted to grow the business and realize his vision of this kind of industrial business. So he wanted to keep investing. And then after they argued a lot. They had a contentious relationship. And eventually he went to New York and found some money men on Wall Street who would back his idea of an industrialized vegetable farm, and would put up the money to build it out. And so he came back to Arthur and said he found these people that wanted to invest in the farm, and he offered to buy Arthur out. I believe the price was $25,000. It was far less than the farm was worth. He had commitments for millions. In fact, the money people eventually invested $5 million in 1906 dollars in the farm. And so he basically cheated his father out of the value of his land. And the guilt over that is one of the explanations. My father always favored this explanation for why his mind turned later in life, and why he was so suspicious of his own sons, because he was fearful that his sons were going to screw him in the way that he had done his father. And in some ways, they actually kind of did. And so it was like a prophecy that kind of came true. But anyway, so the first part of his career was spent canning and getting fresh produce up to the city. They did a lot of innovative work in refrigeration to preserve vegetables. But it wasn't until he met this guy right here that the thing really took off. Now, this guy is Clarence Birdseye. And you can see there, he's in a very cold place. And that was where he had his great eureka moment. It was above the Arctic Circle. He was fishing and he pulled fish from the water, saw the natives pulling fish from the water, and they froze instantly in the 40 below zero air. And then months later, warmed up. He claimed they saw them swim away. I don't know if that's actually, I don't know if that actually is true, but they definitely tasted pretty fresh. So he decided that that was going to be his invention, was going to create that process in the laboratory. And he had a lab up in Gloucester, Mass. And he worked on fish and he worked on poultry as well. And he did figure out the process, the quick freezing process. It was all about speed. It had to the free. If you just put vegetables into the freezer, you're gonna ruin the vegetables. So there had to be the quick freezing process. But vegetables also required another step, which was the blanching before the quick freezing. And he hadn't quite figured that out yet, but he knew that Charlie Seabrook, who by then was styling himself as CF Seabrook, was a very skilled vegetable grower. And so he turned to Charlie and asked him to try to figure out the process. And Charlie and his sons, but mainly his oldest son, Belford, who is the one on the left, figured it out in the 1930s, early 30s. They basically adapted their kind of refrigeration infrastructure and figured out how to blanch and quick freeze vegetables in between these large refrigerated aluminum plates. So at this point, he has his three sons, he had four children altogether. Belford was the oldest. My father, Jack, is the one next to Belford, and CF, and then Courtney in the middle. All of them, CF was never educated. He never really even went beyond 8th grade, but he learned a lot, and he took correspondence courses. His wife, my grandmother, Norma Dale Ivins, was educated, and she was from Newfield, New Jersey, and also from a farm family, and she helped him. But he, as an engineer, he lacked the certification, the qualification to actually sign off on projects. So he saw to it that each one of his sons was educated in a different field, a different branch of engineering. So Belford was a mechanical engineer. He went to Princeton. My dad was a chemical engineer. He went to Princeton too. And Courtney would have gone to Princeton as well, but he didn't want to go. So he enrolled in Lehigh when CF was away. And he was a civil engineer. And so with these three and CF, they kind of formed this brain trust. And eventually the way it kind of shook out was that Belford kind of ran the plant, and that was his domain. Courtney eventually became the marketing guy. He created the brand. The brand started after World War II. We'll get to that in a sec. And all of the imagery from the brand and the logo and the brand story. Courtney was kind of a genius of branding, and that was a very sort of new thing back in the mid 40s. And then my dad was the kind of finance guy, and he was the guy that had the relationships with the bankers, and he could structure the loans. And that was kind of his dad's thing too. And that was the reason why his dad told my father early on that he was the one that was going to succeed him, which turned out not really to be true. He told his sons from a pretty early age that he wanted to create this family kind of empire that would last for 500 years. He had gone over to England. He had seen the way the English aristocrats had these big landed estates and they passed them down through the family and kept them in the family for hundreds of years. And that, well, at least that was the idea that he told his children. That was what he was working to do. Frozen food, frozen there. That was the original brand that Courtney started, and the reason. So it's in the kind of handwriting, which is CF's handwriting, and the reason for that is because that's the way Ford did his logo. You know, it's still that way. It's got the Ford. It was Henry Ford's kind of stylized signature. And the board, I don't know if you've been down to the museum below in the municipal building, but if you go there, and you should go there, you can see there's a board that CF carved his signature on as a very young man in his teens. This is long before he was a businessman, but clearly saw himself going in that direction. And so the board is sort of evoking of that piece. So frozen food was in the 30s, just kind of a small part of the ordinary consumer's awareness. It wasn't until the Second World War when domestic consumers were encouraged not to buy canned vegetables in order to save the metal for the war effort, but to buy frozen vegetables. That was really what made frozen vegetables and other foods kind of break through to the public, and people realized that they were something that was good to eat, and it had a lot of conveniences attached to them that other vegetable and for the business it was fantastic because it sort of took the notion of spoilage, the fact that you had to, like the fresh, had to get it to the market in a certain amount of time, to kind of remove that time pressure. And so it made this kind of industrial concept a lot more practical than it was when it depended on canned food. And I don't know, the process hasn't changed that much. This is a little bit later from the 50s, but it's basically this: you package them first and then you freeze them in these big freezer trays with the liquid. Well, they use liquid nitrogen. They might be using something else now, and 40 degrees below zero, and that's what they turned out. So at its peak, it really was an industry, an industrial town. Here you can see the plant and all the infrastructure, and the greenhouses are these, the greenhouses are right there. They make magnificent greenhouses that were built by the architecture firm that did the incredible solariums for the aristocrats along the Hudson River, where they had their country houses, and they would have these incredible conservatories and solariums, and CF brought them down, and so that he would start the cabbage plants and some of the other vegetables in those greenhouses before you could plant outside. He also had an extensive flower business and nursery business. Coster Nursery was part of Seabrook Farms. Coster, he brought Coster over and gave him some land, and Courtney managed that business for a while. he landscaped his estate on Pope Lane, which is, well, it was until recently the Seabrook House, the rehab center. It's now closed, unfortunately. And if you ever had a chance to see the gardens there, they were absolutely fantastic. And the Seabrook House folks kept them up. I, as a child, remember just kind of getting lost in the kind of mazes of flowers. And, it was incredible that this man, who was a very hard man in some ways, did have this aesthetic sense, for beautiful flowers and shrubs, and created this magnificent domain for himself there. So another part of the book that I was keen on focusing on was the labor piece, because a lot has been written about C.F. Seabrook and as an inventor and a businessman and kind of a heroic capitalist. But not a whole lot was really spent on who actually did the work to make this reality, this dream a reality. And that's a very interesting part of all this, because this is all happening in the 20th century at a time when a lot of folks are leaving the farm. A lot of folks are realizing that they can make more money in the city, in a factory, that the work is indoors and not outdoors, and that they don't get laid off at the end of the growing season and then have to find, new work in the spring. So finding labor was always a challenge. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a lot of Southern European immigrants coming through the port of Gloucester and Ellis Island, and mainly Italian, Southern Italian, Sicilians. And his workforce was mainly made up of Italians. And some of those folks remained, settled. Their children became farmers, quite prosperous farmers, and of course still are in the area. But in the 20s, in the mid 20s, there was this kind of a panic about immigration that we periodically go through, kind of going through one now. And the flow of immigrants was drastically curtailed, and to replace the workers that he got from Italy, he turned to Black American workers who were migrating out of the South, and a lot of them would come to Philadelphia and would to work on the railroad, and then he would recruit from there. Just another image of the factory, so the Black workers were given accommodations that were the least, the least palatable. A lot of them lived out by Orchard Village, which was about a mile from the farm. And then every slow season, or at the end of every growing season, they would be laid off first, even if they had seniority. So eventually, a group of them decided that this was unfair, and that they were going to, they wanted to organize and call a strike. Here's a group of whole families would come and pick. So here's a fantastic picture in the Elks Hall at Bridgeton. These are Black and white workers in 1934 who are forming a union and deciding that they're going to stand up to the great man by going on strike. And so there was this strike. There were actually two strikes, one in April and then one in June in 1934. And these were enormous, epic news events that were covered on the front page of the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, some of the Newark papers, and then a lot of the other smaller regional papers around here, of course, including the Bridgeton Evening News. In fact, every town back in these days had a newspaper, And one of the great things about the Cumberland County Historical Society, when I started out, a lot of these things weren't even available online yet. There was the British Evening News was on microfilm, but like some of the others, like the Dollar Weekly, were all there were the bound volumes in the Cumberland County Historical Society, you know, in that room off the main room. And I found stuff in there that I didn't know at all and would never have found had it not been for the work that the people at the Cumberland Historical Society did to preserve those newspapers. Just a super valuable resource and a reason why local history is so important, because you never know when someone's going to come along and use it in their own story. So this strike went down, and the April one succeeded in getting some promises from CF not to let these folks go first when there was a slow season, but he went back on that. So then there was another strike in June, and at that strike there was violent reprisals from local vigilantes, the local KKK, which had kind of returned to New Jersey, or really they weren't in New Jersey before. They started up in New Jersey in the 1920s. They called themselves the White Knights, and they were around even when I was growing up in Salem. There were cross burnings in Salem in the 60s when they started to enforce busing. So it was a rough situation. There's a terrible, shocking picture, but I think it's worth just kind of looking at it just to sort of see the kind of brutality that underlay some of these farm practices. The strike was not successful, but the black workers were, a lot of them were fired, and that was what then led to the next wave of workers, which were the Japanese Americans and the Estonians. Japanese Americans came beginning in 43, 44, a lot more came, and then a lot of folks were 2,000 altogether came in those years and stayed till at least 1946. Quite a few ended up going back to California, but as you know, a lot stayed. The Seabrook Buddhist Temple was sort of the center of that community. It still is. I was delighted to speak in the Seabrook Buddhist Temple last summer at Oban. That was just I had a very it meant a lot to talk to those folks. And then the Estonians after the war came. CF sponsored about 700 of them, and they came and lived in the company housing. And this introduced another one of the tensions, I think, that occurred between the sons, the father, and the workers. The workers were sort of forced to do what CF wanted them to do, because if they didn't, they could lose not only their jobs but their housing, because he owned all the housing and they paid rent to him. They were all his tenants as well as his employees, and your rent was taken out of your paycheck, and also the food that you bought at the company store. And so they were very loyal folks, but of course they also really, a lot of them, like particularly in the case of the Estonians, some of them might not even have survived had CF not brought them over here, because, you know, going back to Estonia would have meant going back to Soviet occupied Estonia, and some of those folks ended up in concentration camps or just disappeared. So, you know, they were very loyal, and they owed him a debt. And he would play off the workers against his children, who were not quite as eager just to follow everything that their father said to them. And I think that kind of dynamic just kind of festered as time went on, and the sons, you know, by the early 50s, kind of wanted their father out of their hair in managing the business. So they encouraged him to. He made 2 trips to Eastern Europe and became, singularly focused on recruiting these workers. And the sons were kind of happy to let him do that because then they could kind of get on with managing the company as they saw fit. So here's a picture of Seabrook, the housing in the 40s with the iconic smokestack and the water tower, which was always central part of the iconography of the company. And of course, the smokestack and the power plant were built by Jack Kelly. Jack Kelly famously started out as a bricklayer. Like he had some similarities, like with CF, in that he was an immigrant, or is the son of an immigrant who started out as a tradesman essentially, but built up that trade into a large contracting company and built magnificent structures like the power plant. And the relationship between the Kellys and the Seabrooks was important to me in particular, because that's how my dad is going to meet my mother. But we're going to get to that in a second. So my father was married when he was very young, and he had two children. In fact, he eloped. My father, his father didn't want him to marry Anne, his first wife, who was only 19. My dad was 21, and he was still in Princeton then. But he was kind of a headstrong guy, and one of the few examples I know of where he defied his father, although he tried to do it sort of secretly, was that he and Anne, this is not Anne, but he and Anne went to Elton, Maryland one night and got married. You could do that in Elton, Maryland. I can't remember exactly the reason, but something about being on the border meant you didn't have to wait for a marriage license. So a lot of folks would go to that place if they wanted to, immediately get married. And so they got married while he was still an undergraduate, and he didn't tell his dad that he was married. And then later he kind of, they had an actual wedding, but the parents didn't know they were already married at that point. But anyway, and he had two children, my half sisters Carol and Lizanne. Some of you might have known. They lived here, and they lived in the house in Sealy. That was the house that CF owned all the houses that his sons lived in. That was part of his means of control. Like they had to live in his houses, and he felt like he could just walk in anytime he wanted to those places. And so they lived in that house, and occasionally attended Seabrook school. They went there the whole time, but the marriage was never really right to begin with, and it ended after about 8 years. And then my dad became this kind of, his early 30s, he became, he had a kind of a swinging bachelor period. And this woman was his most famous girlfriend. We know who this is, right? Ava Gabor. Ava Gabor, who I feel is still legendary in these parts for swimming naked in my grandfather's pool. I still hear about Ava Gabor. People that's part of the institutional memory of this place. So yeah, he met Ava Gabor in the early 50s, and she was an actress. Most of us know her from Green Acres. And I'm sure we could all sing the song probably if we wanted to, right? Da, 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 da. And I just find it so interesting that in that role, which was her most famous role, she played a sophisticated New Yorker who comes to live on a farm. And here she is actually living that role 10 years before she actually performed it. So yeah, she was a serious girlfriend of my dad's for 2 years. My sister Carol thought they were going to get married. But what came between them? Well, it was his father. His father formed an obsession with Ava Gabor. And he went one night in New York and turned up at Ava Gabor's door and tried to take her out. And she threw him out. And he was so enraged and humiliated by that he came down to the farm, called a board meeting, and excoriated my father in front of the rest of the board for being a playboy and bringing shame on the company, and fired my father, even though everybody knew that at that point it was my father who was really running the business and not CF. CF had a medical event of some kind during the Second World War, and it's not clear what it was. There's different theories. My father always said it was a stroke. My father always was looking for ways to excuse his father's behavior and trying to find, sort of medical reasons for why he seemed to change from a man that talked up, creating this family business that would last for 500 years to trying to seduce his girlfriend. He felt that his mind had changed because of this medical event. I'm not really sure if that's true, but at any rate, that caused a huge disruption. Here's another picture of Ava and my dad. The only turtleneck I ever saw my dad wear. He was not a turtleneck guy, but he was an incredibly stylish dresser. This was another aspect of my dad. If you knew him, you always saw him absolutely perfectly dressed. In fact, as I write in the book, later when we moved to Salem, the house in Salem, he had a dry cleaners apparatus installed in this attic of the house with all of his clothes hanging on it, and then it came down to his dressing room, like from the third floor to the second floor. And then, so if you looked at his closet, it looked like kind of a normal closet, but it had this push button thing here, and then a code with like which buttons, which numbers corresponded to which clothes. And he would push the buttons and you would hear this thing going around and around. And every morning, that's what I woke up to, basically. The sound of my father's moving closet as he got dressed. So yes, he was a very stylish guy. And then later, of course, got into the Coach and Four stuff, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a sec. So in spite of the dysfunction that's creeping into the family, the business is still going great. The Seabrooks, the branding strategy always sort of put a lot of emphasis on the fact that there was a real family behind the brand, unlike Pepperidge Farm or something, which was sort of a made up idea of a family farm. This was a real family farm with real people. And so they kind of marketed themselves to the extent that was possible. And while that also got them a lot of kind of free publicity that they didn't have to pay for, I think that also created tensions in the family because the ideal version of the family was hard for the real family to live up to, and if you were overweight or if you weren't, fantastic at whatever your schoolwork or whatever it was, CF was very, very critical of you because you weren't living up to the ideals of the branded family. But anyway, the pinnacle of that approach was Life magazine in 1955 ran. This is 2 of a 4-page feature story. It was an issue devoted to food, and there's maybe 6 stories of American food producers, and Seabrook Farms was one of them. And the reason was because my dad knew the editor from New York and had managed to kind of finesse it. And it was an enormous coup. General Foods, which owned Birdseye, was a major advertiser in Life magazine, and the editorial staff actually had to keep the story secret from the advertising side, because if the advertising side found out, they would try to kill the story, because it did enrage General Foods that they would pay money for these advertisements, and here Life is giving free advertising, which was much more effective than paid advertising. But that was how they did things, and they were very effective at that. So here's the family on the 50th wedding anniversary of Norma and Charlie. Those are my grandparents right there down in the lower left, in 1956. And you can see Thelma here. And let's spend a little time on Thelma, because she kind of gets a little bit forgotten in the family story. Thelma really wanted to work in the business too. In fact, Thelma went to business school and was the only Seabrook who did go to business school. But CF didn't think that women should work in business. And so he never allowed her to take part in the business. But did come to increasingly rely on her as his health began to fail. They had a place in Coral Gables that they would go down in the wintertime, and he'd kind of recuperate down there. And Thelma would go down there with him. And so they had a kind of a different relationship than the more kind of competitive sort of old bulls and young bulls kind of relationship that the sons had, and that is important too. So by 56, 57, the business is changing rapidly. My father really wants to buy land in California and Florida and start producing, because now they have the brand. You can produce anywhere, and of course the growing seasons were longer there. The labor was cheaper. I should say that even though the Black workers' attempts to form a union failed, the union actually eventually did succeed. The farm workers were unionized. My father was a major driving force behind that, and that also added to tensions with his father. The farm workers were unionized in 1945. Also, my dad was the driving force in integrating the plant. He had much more he wasn't a liberal by any means, but he had, relative to at least to his father, considerably more progressive ideas that, as one being educated at an Ivy League university will encounter. I got even more progressive ideas when I was there, and I had conflicts with my dad over those. But my father had very different ideas about how to manage the workforce and what workers were entitled to than his father, and that caused tensions too. But by 56. He wants to get into frozen concentrated orange juice, which is a new product then, very exciting product. And he wants to expand into other southern growing regions. But CF never wants any of that, because what did CF really want? It was power and control. And Seabrook, at the place was where his power was, and any attempt to kind of spread the production around to other places kind of threatened his hold. And the control of the family was parallel to the control of nature. I mean, one of the most innovative and important agricultural innovations that the Seabrooks made was through a gentleman named Charles Thornthwaite, who was a climatologist, a renowned American climatologist who my father knew about and brought to Seabrook and created a laboratory for. And Charles Thornthwaite created this system of growth called growth units, which is still used today. And the basic idea was, you know, if you calculated temperature, precipitation, evaporation, the time of year, the amount of sunshine at that time, you could determine down to the day exactly how long it would take to take a crop from seed to harvest, you know, to the day. And that was absolutely essential to functioning, because this is a business that's got 30 different, you know, or more crops growing in the course of a year. And, you know, the labor, if they all come ripe at the same time, you're going to have a crisis of labor. You're not going to be able to handle it. So they all have to be staggered, you know, absolutely precisely throughout the you know, 7 or 8 months of growing season. And that's what it was called applied climatology. And Seabrook was really the first place where applied climatology was practiced. And you know, as I say, that was a innovation that continues to be used in the world of agriculture. So, but anyway, meanwhile, my father is thinking maybe he breaks off his relationship with Ava Gabor because his father asked him to, and he's a dutiful boy, and he's really just in the thrall of his dad, even though he's an extraordinarily gifted man and can certainly run the business himself. He never really wants to challenge his father. So here he is with Grace Kelly. This is a picnic. My dad got into this wonderful practice of picnicking with horses and carriages. And that was a tradition that extended into my lifetime. And it was really one of the most fun times you ever had with my dad was when you were going on one of these horse-drawn picnics. They were just magical. He was fantastic with it. So here's Grace Kelly on a cold November day, clutching her hands together. She looks pretty cold. And he didn't date her, but he knew Grace through, you know, the Kelly family's relationship with the Seabrooks. And so when this is 1954, but 2 years later, Grace Kelly decides to get married and invites my father to the wedding. The Kelly family chartered the SS Constitution, which was a major ocean liner, to take the wedding party, which was the Kelly family and friends, and then the press, from New York to Monte Carlo in April of 1956, a 9-day trip. Unknown to my father, my mother is on the ship too. There's my mother to the left of Marilyn Monroe, and then that's her in the sunglasses right there. That's on the ship. My mother, who was my mother? My mother was a reporter, a journalist. She came from Spearfish, South Dakota. She was a Westerner. Her grandfather had gone out there and homesteaded a place in the 1870s, and she was a real sort of pioneer's granddaughter and imbued with that pioneer spirit. She went to Missouri School of Journalism in the early 40s. And then because the war was on and a lot of men were away, she was given opportunities to write, which she probably wouldn't have had there not been a war on. And she's a wonderful writer. She does very well in Kansas City, and she then goes to Washington, D.C. And then by the late 40s, she's in New York City. She becomes a staff writer at United Press, and she's given a column to cover, women's. It was called Women's Day, and it was sort of, about movie stars and fashion people, and so the picture with Marilyn was taken in 1955. Marilyn spent a year in New York. It's the same year as the 70-ish with the iconic dress blowing up over the subway grate. And that was the year she met Arthur Miller and dumped Joe DiMaggio and, all of that. And my mother wrote a couple stories about her, and they seem to really have a connection. She kind of felt the sadness, and Marilyn often talked about it. And then in early 1956, she, or it was like the day before, it was December 31st, 1955, she was doing a story on 10 best dressed women. She called Grace Kelly to get a quote. And since she had her on the phone, she just kind of asked her about this rumor that was circulating around that she might be engaged to Prince Rainier, and she expected her to deny it, but she didn't deny it. And she didn't say anything. She just kept quiet. And then my mother asked again, and there was still silence. And so then my mother said, well, I kind of am inferring that maybe you are engaged, and Grace said, well, if that's what your inference is, then I think you should, run with that. And so she broke the story. She broke the story that the wedding, which really became the wedding of the century. It was an enormous news event. It was one of the Princess Elizabeth's marriage to her coronation. In the 1950s was televised, and that was really one of the first mass TV events. But Grace Kelly's wedding, which was also filmed and later televised, because in order to let her out of her contract, the Hollywood studio said, well, we get to film the wedding. And so they got the rights, the film rights to the wedding. So, my mother, because she kind of broke the story, is invited as a member of the press to sail with the Kelly family, on the ship. And so my dad and my mom are on the ship. They haven't met, but they're really two of the most attractive people on the ship. And it's inevitable they're going to meet. And they do meet the second night out. And my dad is very smitten with my mom, but my mom thinks my dad is just some kind of a playboy that, he's just dallying with her or something. And so she keeps him at arm's length. And they get to Monte Carlo, and there's no news in Monte Carlo because the royal family didn't really want news about the wedding. So there are all these press, hundreds of journalists are there, and there's no news. And so my dad takes my mom out. My dad hears some news, and he takes my mom out to lunch. And he says, now, if you don't tell anyone, I have a story that I think you might be interested in. And my mom was like, oh, I won't tell anyone. And you can count on that. And he says, well, one of the guests just had her jewels stolen. Now, you probably all know the film To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant and Grace Kelly. The film was in theaters still. It had come out, it was a Hitchcock picture, came out the year before. And it is about a cat burglar in the south of France who steals rich women's jewels. And that's Cary Grant. And so the fact that there was a real life cat burglar that had struck at the wedding, was just obviously a fantastic story. My dad said, I'll say you're my secretary, you can come over there interviewing the woman now. And so my mom went sat there, listened to the police, interview the woman, got the scoop, and then just went to the phone and called it in. And like, she was great at that. She was great at like dictating, right, a whole story right over the phone. And the story hit the wires within an hour, and it was it was the scoop of the wedding. And I take great satisfaction in that, because there were all these male journalists who had, against their wishes, been sent to the wedding, whereas they wanted to cover like the Suez Canal crisis or something serious. And instead they're stuck there, and then she scoops all of them. So anyway, that's her on the ship with some of the other journalists. And after they get back from Monte Carlo and the wedding, she thinks she's never going to see him again. A French newspaper had written a story about him in which they called him in French a celebrated breaker of hearts. And she had seen that. She was like, I'm not going to be one of those people, one of his heartbreaks. But he was insistent, and he seemed like kind of a nice guy. So after the wedding, he invites her down to New Jersey for a coaching trip. Now, if you look at the cover of the book, and the cover picture is a picture taken of that day. My mother's riding on the carriage with a couple of, she had two female chaperones she brought down with her, not one, but two. She figured it probably needed like reinforcements against the breaker of hearts. And they're not wearing hats. And this is a horrible faux pas in the world of coaching. So she writes a letter. It's back to one of the wonderful parts of my favorite part, I think, of this book are my mother's letters. My mother was a fantastic letter writer, and because her mother and it was her dad died when she was young, and it was just her mom and her sister. Her mom was like a sorority mom in Columbia, Missouri, at the University of Missouri, and her sister had run off with a guy and lived in New Orleans, and so they were in different places. And so to share her news with them, she would use carbon paper to write, copy a letter to her mom and to Isabel, her sister, and then she kept the original, and then eventually those came to me, and so I was able to experience what it was like to meet the Seabrooks and then meet C.F. Seabrook for the first time, or in the early days, and it was just she was such a smart and observant and kind of decent and well-grounded person that her perspective on what she found when she started going to South Jersey was absolutely invaluable. The letter she wrote after this very first trip, she said, I went on a carriage ride with Jack Seabrook. What a stupid way to spend your money. I'm never doing that again. And she ended up doing it pretty much the rest of her life. But it is kind of a stupid way. No, it wasn't. And so anyway, so they're married only 6 months after Grace is married in October of 1956, and she moves down to South Jersey, and she kind of thinks that she's joining this kind of glamorous, aristocratic, successful American family, but really she's like becoming involved in a nut house. Because by that point, CF was really around the bend. And it's not really clear to me, again, what happened, but my father says that this fear of like the guilt that he had felt over his father's, the fact he cheated his father out of his land, festered in him, and he just began to feel that his sons were plotting to do something similar. He was also, he never really fully recovered from that medical event, and he took phenobarbital to kind of keep going, and I think he took a lot of it, and he was also drinking pretty heavily, so his mind was not right, and my mother saw this man as he was, and if in the book there's this remarkable letter. Here, let me just borrow your book. I'm going to read this one once again. I'm just going to read. This gives you a taste both of my mother's ability to write, which matters a lot to me because it's kind of how I became a writer, and why I followed her path and not my father's, but also just kind of what her letters meant. So this is a letter written in 1957 when she's had a little time with C.F. Seabrook. Jack's father is without doubt one of the most remarkable men of all time. Cunning, domineering, and spiteful beyond belief almost. I guess he will always work to undermine Jack because he resents so bitterly that Jack is running the business. He is a man whose life has been motivated by a single force: to control. He must control the people and the property around him. He knows no security except financial dominance. And he has no basis for having people as friends, only to have them kowtow to him as dependents or to oppose him and be enemies. He couldn't run the business without Jack, though I guess he would try. If I had been born a Seabrook, I wouldn't have stayed around here for all the vegetables in the world. I thought about calling my book All the Vegetables in the World. Why all of his family has lived under his malicious spell all their lives, I can't understand. By alternating kindness with unexpected vicious thrusts, he keeps people in his orbit constantly off balance. He is fiendishly clever, and I suppose is punished more than he punishes others by the suspicious, conniving, resentful old age he is living. Yeah. So here she is, and doesn't know anybody down here, deep South Jersey. She's come from Spearfish, South Dakota, and her husband and her father seem to be getting into this increasingly desperate conflict. But she's willing to go. Like here's a picture of her taken by Slim Aarons, this well-known photographer from the 50s. This is actually a picture that appeared in Holiday magazine in a story called The Effete East, written by, of all people, Roger Angel, who later became a colleague of mine at the New Yorker. And she's kind of fits into the my father's lifestyle pretty well. But meanwhile, the business is suffering from the fact that the chairman was C.F. Seabrook and the president, who was my father, are at odds, to say the least. And so the bankers, at this point, there's a number of bankers on the board of directors because the company has borrowed a lot of money over the years. The bankers say, your father is destroying the business, and if you don't get him out of management, we're going to call our loans and we're going to bankrupt the company because this is going to be, he's going to run it into the ground. And so my father and his brothers said, well, he owns 51% of the company, so there's not much we can do. And one banker said, well, yes, there is. You can have him committed. You can have him declared mentally, incompetent, insane, basically. And so the brothers discuss this and they decide that's what they're going to do. And let's just remember that the CF was always concerned that his sons were going to somehow betray him, and in a way he almost brought it on himself. But so Courtney, the middle brother, who had the best relationship with CF, takes him to Philadelphia and leaves him at this sanatorium called Fairmont Farm. And they begin proceedings to have him, declared unfit. At first, my grandmother, Norma Dale, who was this very sweet, lovely woman who her husband treated horribly, was willing to go along with it. And Thelma kind of was too, but Thelma's relationship with him was probably better than the boys' relationship, and she eventually said she couldn't go along with it, and so he got a lawyer to get him out of Fairmont Farm, and then he sold the business to spite his sons. He sold the business, and then he not only did that, but he disowned his sons, and he left all the money to Thelma. And so not only did the boys get denied what they thought was their birthright, but their birthright went to their sister, who had never worked in the business, which also destroyed their relationship with her. Thelma moved away, went to North Jersey. I never saw her again after probably 1964. And I was, 5 years old, although I did later have a relationship with her children, Patty Otten and Richard, her son, who became a very well-respected and well-known oceanographer and was a longtime professor at Duke. So now my father and my mother are forced to leave. That's their house on Sealy Road. CF evicted them from the house, and we moved to Mannington Township in Salem County, about 20 miles away, where I grew up. Some of you probably know that property. My father's former carriage house has now been turned into a distillery and tasting room called the Dog and Ram. So my grandfather's former house became a rehab center, and my dad's house became a distillery. So it tells you something about the role that alcohol played in the Seabrook family. But I encourage you, actually, it's open on weekends, and it's great. I love it. The Dog and the Ram. It's a great place to go and hang out and have a drink of the stuff they concoct there. We start a new life. My dad has plenty of friends in Philadelphia who want to, because he's a brilliant guy, finance guy, and these bankers want him. So he lands on his feet and becomes very successful in his second career. After my grandfather dies in 1964, and the will is, sort of read, but the brothers decide to challenge the will and challenge the fact, that he was mentally incompetent to change it at that point. And so there's a lot of discovery, there's a lot of interviews, a lot of timelines are made detailing CF's behavior in his last 10 years and the way he treated his sons, and my father in particular. But that suit is eventually settled before it gets to court. And those documents are just kind of kept by my father, which without sharing them ever with anyone. And what's interesting really about my father after all this kind of went down was that he never really criticized his father. And I was kind of born right in the midst of this, and I always had questions, like what happened to the business, and really what was your relationship with your father like? In fact, this is my birth announcement. You can see I was basically born as a product. I was processed, and distributed. And that's we grow our own, so we know it's good. That's, say I'm like a pea. They're like, so, and I was the one, yeah, it was, my father always sort of had this idea that there was going to be this family legacy that lasted 500 years, and I was the next in line. Anyway, so he never really spoke about his dad in a negative way. He made it clear that he was a very tough guy, but he never really criticized him for what he did. But after my dad died in 2009, he kept a lot of stuff. He was a meticulous filer. There are all these boxes, but there were these 3 boxes that said "Save for JMS Junior." He was always keen on remembering that I was a junior, even though I didn't use the junior in my byline. He always thought that was his name, but he called himself Jack, so I felt that was okay. Anyway, so he left me these 3 boxes saying "Save for JMS Junior." And in those boxes were these materials that he and his brothers had collected in 1964 when they were going to challenge the will. And there I found the truth about his relationship with his father and just how incredibly toxic it was, and just how abusive his father had been to him. It almost beyond imagination that a man could treat his own son the way that, for no reason except jealousy or envy or distrust. It's just, we struggle still, I think. Was it medical? Was it drugs? Was it alcohol? Was he born that way? Was it all sort of, false when he said he was going to leave all this to them? I still don't know the definite answer to that, but it was pretty clear from these materials that my dad left me that he wanted the truth known. He knew what I would do with them. I mean, at that point I was quite a well-established writer, and it was kind of, for the writer, for the investigative journalist, this was gold, but for the family member, this was a very challenging situation because, I wasn't really in it to drag my grandfather down, but I was in it to honor my father and to respect what he seemed to want in leaving me these materials, which was to have the truth be known. So that was how the sort of book project started, and it was very, very difficult to figure out how to balance my desires as a writer and a journalist and an investigative reporter with, my role as a family member and the benefits that I got from being a family member. One of the ways I guess I tried to balance that, and Roberta wrote me this lovely letter about this, was I didn't really spare myself either in the book. I was kind of as honest about some of my own failings as I am about my grandfather's. And and in the course of writing the book, I kind of like understood my father for the first time. He was a difficult man to know. He never really showed weakness. And some of you may have known him as when he would drive his coach and 4 horses around. He literally looked like a king. This is literally the sport of kings, to have 4 horses and a top hat and drive down these country roads in South Jersey. And I think the part of what was driving that was that he never wanted to accept the idea that his father might have beaten him or had prevented him from realizing what was his birthright, which was this kind of, sort of royal, birth that he received and would fulfill regardless of whether his father went along with it or not. I also one of my children. I have two children. I live in Brooklyn now. They're grown. Well, one's 18, one's 27. I wanted them to know the truth. And I also wanted to respect the fact that a lot of the workers thought very highly of this man and had a very different view of him. And I've been gratified as I go around and present the book to hear from so many former Seabrookers, who were children during all of this, as I was, and who, like me, didn't really know what was really going on, and who also, like me, were protected by their parents from some of the kind of harsher realities of their life. A lot of the people who came from the internment camps and then the Eastern European displaced person camps, particularly the latter, thought they were arriving in the land of milk and honey, and they got to a place where the barracks were in some ways rougher than the barracks that they were living in these camps, and now they were paying rent for it. So it was not easy, not easy is an understatement. This was extremely challenging, but the children were kept from a lot of the hardship and have a lot of them who are now kind of my age have happy memories of Seabrook. So connecting with those folks and also kind of realizing that, you can hold two ideas that differ at the same time in your mind. It's part of what makes you able to function in the world. And some people do have this view of CF that's very, he played a positive role in their lives. And I don't want to dishonor that role. But at the same time, I think it's important that we know what this man was actually like. And to me, it's important that people know what my father had to deal with and how that shaped him. That's basically what the book, what you'll learn from reading this book. If you haven't read it yet, there are 30 copies. Tia has 30 copies. I'd be happy to sign them for you. And if you have any questions, because it's fun to discuss this stuff, why don't we I'll sort of stop talking now, and I'll invite anyone who has any comments, questions, review the Seabrooks to ask them. So, yes. Yeah.
They each have different fathers.
That's right.
They have the same memories from their fathers in which they were well.
No. I don't think any family really wants a family member to write the story of the whole family, because every family member is going to have a pretty different interpretation of that story. And for my sister, Carol, who's 84 now, she was around, in the 1950s. She was born in 1942, so she had a good long time with CF. And although she didn't disagree with my interpretation of him, she thought that I got that quite right. She did have differing views on my father and her mother and the Ava Gabor stuff. But she wrote me a very thoughtful letter. It helps that her work is actually a crisis manager. So when families have a scandal, when they have someone like me that makes a big stink, they call her in and she sorts it out. So she was a perfect person to handle me in this situation. She wrote me this very thoughtful letter saying that, while she didn't agree with a number of my interpretations, she valued our relationship more than whatever sort of disagreement we might have over that, and basically kind of left it at that. and we haven't really talked about it. In fact, I haven't really talked, and my brother, my brother Bruce is my younger full sibling. Lizanne, the other half sister, died 10 years ago or so. My brother hasn't said a single word about it. But we have a perfectly friendly, he's coming to see me in New York next week with his family. We're perfectly, we're in a good place. It's just that he doesn't want to engage with it. And then the cousins down here, they're probably not too happy either. I mean, Jim and Wes and Brian still have Seabrook Brothers and Sons. And we haven't discussed it, although I saw them all at Jim Seabrook's memorial. Jim Seabrook died, as probably a lot of you know, recently. And Freitag, there was a memorial at Freitag's that the whole family attended, and it was good feelings all around. So, I don't think anyone is absolutely enraged, but I don't think anyone is like thrilled either. It's just like everybody's story is a little different, and I don't pretend. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that this is my story, and there were so many different stories that I could have told. Everybody had a story about CF, and just to kind of give some kind of shape and focus, I just tried to make it really kind of clear that it was kind of my story, and that others would probably have a quite different story. I think we're going to probably leave it at that. Yeah.
I'm sorry. A few weeks ago, as I was theater, I had the
Right.
documentary again.
Yeah.
And your cousin, Heidi, was there.
Yeah.
And he talked about that they still had some of the business, but they didn't raise any vegetables. They got it from.
That's right.
And he said, because I used to buy Seabrook, broccoli raw, I love your broccoli raw.
Oh, thank you very much.
But ShopRite doesn't carry the brand anymore. And I wondered.
Did you ask Ivan about that? If anybody knows, it's Ivan.
Well, they talked about having problems with abilities.
That's right.
They're not in operation now.
That's right.
And the question is, do you have anything to do with it? And are they going to get back in time?
That is the $1 million question. And it's and the people are freaking out over the cream spinach too. They can't get the frozen cream spinach. You can't get it anywhere, right? And yes, because as I think a lot of you probably know, there was this accident at the plant, a wall collapsed. They shut it down. It hasn't reopened. They're kind of fighting with the insurance. And so they haven't made any contracts with the growers for this coming growing season. And right now there's no production at all. So unless they sort it out and figure it out, I don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of up in the air right now. Yeah. Yes.
Kind of a minor detail perhaps, but why Estonia and not Latvia or Lithuania or some other area?
Well, there were some Latvians that did come, and a few Lithuanians came too, but my grandfather knew Estonia. He had been to Estonia. There was a period in my grandfather's life that I write about in the book.
The road building.
The road building period. This, because he knew how to build roads because he first built them on the farm. Then he became New Jersey Highway Commissioner, and he built Route 77 right out here. It's Route 46 then. 4-lane highway right from Camden to the farm with public funds. And that was a classic New Jersey move. And then I think if you read the book, if you've heard stories, Joseph Stalin brought him to Moscow in 1929 because Joseph Stalin thought that my grandfather was like the great American road builder. He was very good at promoting himself. And he brought him over to Russia to build roads. But in that period, he also did sort of works. He built docks in Odessa, and in Estonia, he also did some kind of infrastructure works in the mid-20s. I saw a newspaper article that was translated from Estonian that Helga, the filmmaker of the film, which if you haven't seen, you should see, The Paradox of Seabrook Farms. She had it. So he knew the Estonians. He thought very highly of Estonians as workers and, well educated. And so when he went to pick out the people from the camps that he wanted, he basically picked the Estonians. So that's how we got the Estonians.
Questions, instead of the two, because you answered the one. The sycamores on Seabrook Road, that's obviously refound.
Right.
The question is, why sycamore trees? And the second question is it true that Green Acres was because of your family having an actress down here?
Well, okay, let's take the first one. The first one's easy. The sycamore trees, also called plane trees in some cultures, were my grandfather's idea. He had seen them. If you go to Paris and you walk along the Seine, you see these beautiful sycamore trees that are growing right on the banks of the Seine, and just kind of add this very beautiful aspect to Paris. And CF, who, CF traveled widely in the era of ocean liner travel. He would make 2 trips to Europe every year, and that was, so a week there and a week back. So you're basically on a ship for a month. And a lot of what he knew about clothes and wine and food, he learned on those ships. So at any rate, yes, he brought the idea of lining the Polk Lane and around Sealy with sycamore trees. And then when we moved to Mannington Township, my dad planted sycamore trees all along what was then called Griscom Road and Halltown Road. Later, Griscom Road was changed to Nimrod Road because my dad was obsessed with the figure of Nimrod. But unfortunately, Nimrod, between the time my dad became obsessed with the figure of Nimrod, who was an Old Testament figure, and the 1980s, Nimrod became like an insult, like you Nimrod. And so these bad boys kept stealing the sign. So we couldn't have it be Nimrod Road anymore. And eventually now it's Seabrook Road. And a lot of those trees, unfortunately, like farmers tend to like back their tractors into them. And so they're like missing teeth kind of along the road. But anyway, so that's the second one. Was Green Acres actually inspired by Ava's experience in New Jersey? I would certainly like to think so. And I'm sure she drew on her experiences down here in that role, because, it really was, she owned that role, and she wasn't really a great actress, but she certainly excelled in that role. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say absolutely Green Acres was based on this Ava. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Dan Boehner, and
Hey, Dan.
1970s, when my first wife rented one of the farmhouses owned by his father on the Halltown Road.
Oh, okay. Which one?
People in the back,
It's not there anymore.
They tore them all down.
Yeah, what was the first one coming down Halltown Road?
The brick one?
The estate. Yeah, big brick house.
Yeah, the neoclassical brick house.
So the people in the back.
Okay. Yeah, and so.
Yeah, that was a beautiful house.
It was beautiful.
They tore it down.
They had 4 grand fireplaces and these beautiful dawn redwoods.
Yeah, that's right.
When I was out in the yard on Saturday afternoon, I saw the carriage, your father and mother coming down Halltown Road in their 1-horse carriage.
Okay.
The horse ran away with the carriage.
Oh.
So somehow instinctively, I ran out and grabbed the halter of the horse
Oh, wow.
and stopped it, right? So
That's brave of you.
I looked at your father and he was terrified.
It was just, yeah, those were powerful horses.
Right, so I stopped the horse, he got the reins back and just moved on, right? Moved on down the road. He didn't thank me.
I'm gonna thank you. Thank you. A little late.
That's why I told the story. I wanted to get thanked.
Thank you, Dan.
it seems to fit the profile that you described, so. But it was quite a thing to see that carriage go down the road.
Wow.
They had a picnic, as you know.
Yeah, they're in a picnic ground down there.
Down the road.
Yeah, I mean, driving, and that was just one horse, so like with four
Yeah.
horses, and sometimes they would kind of, get spooked by something, and you had to really know what you were doing, and that's why eventually when he got to be 80, he auctioned it all off. He had this big auction there at the farm, sold all of his carriages, sold everything, the harness,
Mhm.
and then he spent then he moved to South Carolina with my mom, and that's where they lived out the rest of their years.
So he was a great landlord, and in fact, he invited my wife and I to dinner. At
Oh,
his
yeah?
house. They had Chinese cooking.
Oh, that was back in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Chinese cooking.
yeah, yeah, he had a Chinese.
I knew your
cook.
sister.
Lizanne or Carol? Lizanne, Carol,
Yeah, Carol,
yeah,
lawyer.
Yeah, she's a lawyer.
law school.
that's right.
Right. So anyway,
Cool, good story. Thanks, Dan, for sharing that one. Yeah.
In the book, you look at your father's love train.
Yeah.
I can remember working over at the farm this summer, I was a teacher. And I was working at garage. And the hands at the farm and the garage would tell me story of carrying batteries up to the attic of the mansion in order to run the trains
Oh, really?
for the kids.
Because he originally had the training room outside the house. My dad was a very serious model train builder, and this was part of his mind. He had this sort of systems oriented way of thinking, and so he built. It was modeled on an actual train depot somewhere, Philadelphia, I think. And the factories and the goods would go from here to there. And it seemed like a great thing, but it was so complicated that if you were a kid, you weren't allowed to touch it, right? So it was kind of like a torture in a way. There was this unbelievably cool train set, but it was so sophisticated that no children were allowed to touch it. But eventually, they moved it up into the house, and my mom tried to get him to go back to it, but he kind of lost interest in it. And, we ended up with all these train parts. That was one of the, he was a real pack rat. He saved so much stuff, including all those clothes. So when he died, there was just like all this stuff. And I thought, well, with the trains, we found a train enthusiast that took it, basically. But with the clothes, I thought that because he had all these beautiful handmade English suits, it would be easy to find people who would want to wear them. But, by then it was, he died in 2009. The world had kind of changed, and what the secondhand stores wanted were brands. They wanted, famous brands. And I had a real hard time finding people who wanted the suits, and I ended up, I had a lot of friends who were more or less his size, and I ended up giving a lot of the suits to my friends who had them tailored for them. And now I get together with them sometimes and we put on my dad's suits. Like a suit party. Yeah.
Yeah, just a question about, while you were writing this, did you find this to be exhausting, energizing, and did you ever have doubts about actually having it published because of the content and how it would reveal so much about your family?
Right.
That's-
This is a very challenging book to write. It's my fifth book, and by far the most challenging one. It was just, first of all, it was just so much material. I went way deep. I spent a lot of time in the Cumberland County Historical Society, just like researching local history. And one of the pleasures that I took from writing this was being able to do local history, be able to tell the story of this place and what's really unique and special about, deep South Jersey. And one of the real fun things about going around and talking about it is getting to meet up with people who know what I'm talking about because they're from there. And a lot of them are no longer there. And a lot of folks move away, you know, as I have. But you never get like the sunsets, the fields, the irrigation, you know, just something about it that's really special. So I had took on a lot more local history than I could really use. And I probably wrote 3 or 4 drafts of this book. The first one was twice as long. You know, it was just endlessly long. And also I didn't quite know where to start. You know, so I thought maybe if I should start at the beginning, you know, with the great-great-grandfather, but that didn't really make sense. And because one of the unique things about this book is it's sort of a combination of memoir and kind of history report. So part of it is experienced by me, but then there's long sections that take place long before I was born, but I'm still telling the story in my voice. And so figuring out how to, like the strike, for example, there's a long narrative section about like day to day or almost like hour to hour what happened in this strike. And of course, I wasn't around for that, but thanks to all of this incredible local journalism, and then when newspapers.com came in like the last 10 years or so, and all that stuff got digitized, then you could search, you know, the Millville paper and, you know, the Violin paper and the British, you know, and get all these different perspectives. So I had just a wealth of material, and I struggled a lot with, and then, you know, there's the Japanese American stories, there's the Estonian stories, there's the African American stories, so many stories, but it always kind of had to be my story, and I had to kind of come back to myself periodically to kind of keep the reader oriented. So yeah, it was super difficult to do it, and I have like enough left over for 2 more books, so maybe I will do another one because yeah, I've got a lot of stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Your father and your uncles were fired.
Yeah.
What did they go on to do? And then I have a second question. Last week I went to see the Seabrook Museum.
Oh, you did, good.
Yes, and my sister and I did. And it was all new to me about the Japanese, and I just didn't know that much. But did he get the housing subsidy or funded by the government for when he built the Japanese barracks?
Yeah, so the Japanese housing, which was originally for the African American workers that didn't get that housing, was built with government loans during the war, and eventually he got ownership of that housing. But yeah, the government, Seabrook, both world wars were fantastic for all farmers, but a major industrial food producer like Seabrook, they contracted everything they grew with to the war effort during the Second World War. And although soldiers couldn't take frozen food in most cases to, like, you know, North Africa or something, they dehydrated beets and rutabagas were a major part of meals ready to eat for soldiers. And so at Seabrook, like, they brought in these huge dehydrators, and everything was beets. Everything was planted in beets, and the processing of the beets turned Silver Lake red. Silver Lake was blood red throughout the Second World War because of all this runoff from the beet harvest that Seabrook, you know. So,
Well, I was asking about your father and uncle's work.
Oh, yeah, so Belford, the oldest, was the first to really butt heads with CF, and when Pearl Harbor happened, Belford wanted to enlist, and his father went ballistic because he felt he was betraying him by signing up to fight for his country. That was kind of gives you a little bit of insight into my grandfather's mindset. And so and my father also wanted to go to war, and my father did not go, but Belfort did go and enlisted and became a colonel and was stationed in Australia, worked for the quartermaster and handled food for the Allies in the South Pacific. And then afterwards, he did sort of work, and my father tried to kind of bring him back into the company, but Belfort never really could abide his father, and he eventually moved to Thailand and worked for the CIA. He became a member of the CIA, and he lived a good deal of time in Thailand, and then he married a few times, and he ended up coming back to South Jersey and living with his third wife. And Courtney, the middle son, he always stuck around. He lived in Woodstown for years and years. He married Trudy Hathaway, and you know the Huber family, or Trudy's mother, I guess it was. Right. Yeah, Margaret Hathaway, and you know I don't know what Courtney's work was, but maybe he sort of more or less retired and just kind of lived a comfortable life. Courtney never got into the same conflicts. Maybe it's like the middle son thing, I don't know. But he never got into the kind of conflicts with his father that the other two had. And then, you know, my dad, he found work in Philadelphia, so he landed on his feet. He had all these relationships with the bankers from the money that they borrowed, and they knew how brilliant he was, so he had no trouble. And then, like I said, Thelma moved up to Maplewood in North Jersey, and we never saw her again. Although I did have a relationship with some of her kids. The family was really kind of splintered, though. I mean, the boys they always stuck together. They never turned on each other, and they remained friends. Even though I think the fact that my dad was kind of like the golden boy, and given he was going to be the one that took over, and he did eventually take over. Probably like the older brothers probably didn't love that. But they never really got into a fight over it, and you know, I always had good relationships with both of them. So, yeah.
And one final back to the Seabrook workers, the Japanese. They worked 12-hour shifts, and the husband would work night, the wife would work day.
Right.
Was that comparable to other produce manufacturing companies in the area? I don't know if Del Monte or Progresso existed at the time. Did they all do 12-hour shifts like that, and were the wages comparable?
I don't know the answer to that question. I've always felt like 12-hour shifts and then they have to shift from night to day every 3 weeks. So not only do they have to do the 12-hour shifts, but then you're going from 12 hours of day to 12 hours of night every 3 weeks. I mean, the people I've talked to about that just say that it was just really, really difficult you can sleep and you know, and then, you know, working in the plant, you know, it was either you're in the area where they're doing the blanching where it's hot, or you're in the area where you're doing the freezing where it's super cold, and you're going back and forth, and then the noise of it, like the machinery, was just deafening. So, and then there was always kind of wet on the floor. I mean, it was very difficult work. And even though, you know, they had machines that would do, you know, some of the harvesting, they still needed a lot of people to sort on the lines, you know, to pick out the stones or the sticks or the bits of refuse that got swept up by the machines. And those were always women that did that work. And uniforms, you know, you see them wearing those. If you went to the museum, you could see. So I'm not sure whether what was the case at Ritter and Del Monte, but I know they drove them really hard at Seabrook. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for giving me a name in my husband's lineage.
What's that?
James Gordon. Good.
James Gordy.
Yeah. Cooling, you said in your book.
Oh, okay. Is that a question or just a comment? Yeah, okay, thank you for that comment, yeah, we got a question there. Or maybe back there.
Question, I was just going to add that, my birthday and the voice pops.
Okay,
Everybody hear me? I wasn't really trying to turn anything. Here you are. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I'm Raythan DeVoice Fox, and I was born in 1948, and I grew up on a farm in Salem County on Burlington Road, and my family still farms almost 4,000, well, double cropping, 4,000 acres total.
great,
And they were one of the biggest growers for Seabrook Farms for years.
really.
My grandfather, Henry K. DeVoice,
Oh,
they
yeah.
grew
Lima
baby
beans.
limas,
Lima.
wood hooks, peas, and then eventually they got into spinach, which actually they're probably harvesting now. They do trailer loads, everything's done mechanically now. But years ago, I can remember there was a Jamaican camp across from where I grew up on Burlington Road. There was a Jamaican labor camp. And the men were brought up and worked there at the, in the plant and for the farm and on the farm. And I can remember the wooden boxes that they had
They made 'em-
on the
they made 'em
boulders.
right there.
Yeah.
Out of the local lumber.
Yeah, and we still have a few around the farm, but they would stack them, they'd fill them from the binders. And they would stack them
Yeah,
and put them on the trucks and take them down to the plant for the processing of the peas, baby limas and Ford hooks.
yeah,
And I can remember driving the trucks when I was of age out to the fields. And they would load the trucks, the portaways, and we would bring them back, and they were dump trucks, and they would open up the gates in the back, or I would, and put them back near the viners, and then they would, they would actually fork the peas, baby limas, or Ford hooks, and into the viners to be processed
Yeah,
further.
you
I can remember all that. It was fascinating.
yeah, the lima bean is something that a lot of folks really were introduced to by the Seabrooks. The lima bean was a fantastic vegetable to freeze because it's, sort of durable and to harvest mechanically. And I think, and the Ford Hook lima beans, freaking Ford Hook 25, maybe was the variety. It was one of the most successful varieties. And, a lot of folks who probably were forced to eat lima beans and hated them can thank the Seabrooks. But I always like lima beans. And succotash too, I thought it was good. But,
Thank you.
Thank you, anyway, yes.
I just wanted to say, I've only been here since 65,
Oh, only 665.
but, Progresso wasn't here. Campbell's had, I know tomatoes, maybe vegetables, but the things that were here were Ritter's and Hunt's.
Yeah, that's right,
And you could smell the ketchup in Bridgeton.
that's right. That's right.
I would say
Yeah, Campbell's within sales.
I wanted to tell you that they are rebuilt that plant.
What's that?
They are rebuilding the Seabrook plant.
Oh, they are
Yeah,
rebuilding.
they started right when the winter weather was real bad after that, and they went in there, gutted it all out, and it's,
warehouse looking thing is.
yeah. So they are rebuilding it.
Okay, well, I know a lot of people will be relieved to hear that because I think that cream spinach is like part of a lot of people's family rituals. It's important to their life. So it'd be a shame if it weren't around.
When I was 16, I worked for Tom Years in Marlboro. And he grew peas and flower beans, and I took a truck. And they loaded them on the truck. We took the truck to the barn. They had their own barn there on Marlboro Road. And they thrashed the bees and a lot of bees there.
Yeah,
And, that was a good thing. And I got one question.
yeah.
Where's the safe?
Where is the safe?
I know everybody wants to know.
Yeah, I went down there, I did an event in the former carriage house, now the Dalton Ramp Distillery. They even made a little Spinach King drink, which unfortunately I wasn't able to taste, but, looked pretty tasty. And I then went down to the basement and said, where's the safe? And, he said, it wasn't here when the gentleman who bought the house, who's an eye doctor from New York who uses it for weekends. He said it wasn't here, so somebody took it. So I mean, it's kind of unbelievable that it's not there because it was a very heavy piece. And my brother doesn't know, and you know, no one that I know knows. So that's a remaining mystery that I hope to solve one day. I would guess.
I see you.
You got a lot of walking to do here.
Well, ask my husband, he thinks I should.
Okay. Oh, you got the wires and everything here. Hold on. Let's get that out of the way.
It's my understanding that according to the safe, what I know is, I knew a gentleman that was a chauffeur for CF Seabrook.
Yeah.
CF Seabrook gave him the safe.
Gave him the safe?
Gave him the safe because he asked me, me and a buddy of mine, to move it. I said, no way, that thing's heavy.
Wait, CF Seabrook or my dad, or was it my dad who gave it? Was it my dad?
That's, he had, this guy said he was a chauffeur for CF Seabrook, and the safe was given to him, but I don't know if it was true, fiction, whatever.
Because the safe, the safe, that my dad kept these documents in was supposedly the safe that CF and his father had, when they had the business together, and it said Seabrook and Son on the safe. And so it's probably been through several lifetimes, this safe, and I don't know how it got from CF to my dad, but at some point it got from, you know, here or Deerfield to Salem, and then it was in the basement of the house in Salem, and then it disappeared from there.
Well, it could be that this safe wasn't the same safe, maybe it was a different safe.
I don't know. Yeah, the safe is going to be an enduring mystery, but hopefully I'll come back here and tell you the answer to it.
I have not read the book, I have the book, but I have not read it, but I heard a story from a credible source, now deceased, that Deerfield Township was a big township.
Yeah,
And CF wanted a school on 77.
that's right.
And Deerfield would not let them put a school on 77.
That's right. They
And
wouldn't pay for it, yeah.
well, CF wanted to show them how much his business affected the area. And for a whole month, he paid all of his employees in silver dollars. And those silver dollars flooded Cumberland County.
Yes.
The gas company, the electric company, the telephone company, the grocery stores, all were flooded with silver
I've
dollars.
still got the,
And that convinced them that they needed a school on 77.
well, now that story is, can I just correct you a little bit on that story? You've got kind of two stories mushed together there. It was, the school was built in 1921, 1922,
And that's when they made Upper Deerfield.
And the reason that Upper Deerfield was created was so that he could build that school, because Deerfield didn't want to build a school. And so CF actually created a new township, which was basically where Seabrook Farms was. The cavalcade of cartwheels, which is what you're talking about, took place 30 years later in the 1950s. And it wasn't related to the school. It was just so that he could show how important to the general economy Seabrook was. And so, yeah, everybody was paid in, they call cartwheels, silver dollars.
Okay.
And yeah, I still have a bag of them.
Yeah.
They were around. There's probably floating around places still.
Thank you for the correction.
Yeah, so I basically had it right. He just conflated two stories.
Now, I don't want to interrupt anybody that has a question. I just wanted you to know. If I make everybody else use that, I should. I wanted you to know that both doors go down to the fellowship hall where they're having refreshments.
Oh,
And the one on the right has a stair chair. If that would be more convenient for you, the stair chair goes up to the hallway. The ladies' room is the last door on the left. The men's room is the second to the last door on the left. You go out this door and go up the stairs. The ladies' room is the first door on the right. The men's room is the second door. If you go down the stairs, you get into the fellowship hall.
okay. Thank you for that.
I just trying to make it,
Where are the books sold?
that's not me.
That's Tia.
I'll pick that up. I will also use this little microphone.
This is so cute.
Books are also downstairs for sale. We're selling them especially for this event, $10 a book, just because we knew there would be a big turnout and people were interested in the books.
But it's $30 regularly.
Yes, so we reduced the price for today because we knew many people were interested. We also have a little basket for donations if anybody's interested, and like it was mentioned, there are refreshments downstairs. So there are sodas, water, crackers, veggies. I bought spinach dip for the event.
Yeah, down there. Yeah.
But of course, if anybody has any more questions or comments, I'll let you know. Thank you for that, everybody who came out, and thank you, of course, to John Seabrook for coming for our annual speaker series, the last one of 2026. So thank you all very much, and we'll meet you downstairs.
Yeah, I'll be down there.